Hey, welcome back to the Empowered Homes Leadership Podcast. I'm Ryan Rush, and I'm here with my friend Bobby Cooley, and we're just unpacking some practical insights that we have learned related to leadership. And Bobby, hey, good to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm going to talk about one that may be a little bit deeper than some of the other things we've covered, because I'm going to talk about the spiritual dangers and the concerns we can have related to leadership. Because I'll bet you there's not a person who's with us today who doesn't know 2 or 3 stories of key leaders, national, local, otherwise, who have found themselves in really difficult situations because of pride or bad choices.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, we've all been around it.
And so when you have more influence, it's not like the dangers necessarily go up. We can have no influence and have dangers of failing morally or otherwise, but I do think the impact is greater. I've mentioned before, my dad was a pilot all growing up, and was an Air Force pilot, war hero, and then went from there, ran an airline, ran airports when I was growing up, and all those sorts of things. And so he taught me to fly at an early age. All to say, I remember flying with him and we were like a Cessna 172, a little bitty plane. And I said, Dad, you've flown big planes. What's the biggest plane you've flown? And he talked about some jet. And I said, what's the difference? And he said, it all runs virtually the same. Everything kind of operates the same way. And I said, so do you think I could fly a jumbo jet? And he said, you probably could. And he said, but you probably wouldn't be allowed. I said, well, if I can, why wouldn't I be allowed? And he said, because the responsibility goes up when others' lives are in your hands.
Wow.
And that's really what it means. When we talk about leadership and we talk about the traps of leadership, that's why it's so important, because when I mess up, it's not just me that hurts, in leadership. And the most simple example we talk about, the primary leader that God created on earth is whom? It's the dad and the mom.
Yep.
Okay, it goes right back to the very core of empowered homes. And so if mom and dad mess up, there is no practical way where the kids aren't impacted. Now, we understand the grace of God. I'm grateful for second chances, and there's no one who is a part of this podcast today who is innocent and sin-free, and certainly not the two sitting here,
not
right?
Me. Nope.
So what do we do? And so I do think it's important to understand that we have a real enemy and real dangers about us. But here's the good news. The strategy that the enemy uses against people, God's people, is not new and it's not creative. And so that at least should help a little bit on how we can avoid those traps. And so I want to read a passage of Scripture from 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. And John says this, for everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride in one's possessions is not from the Father, but is from the world. So a lot of people have memorized that or heard it before, pride of life. But that's a good way to put the pride in one's possessions. There's a sense of lust and of the flesh, of the eyes, and then this pride. So what does that mean practically? Those are the traps of leadership. And we can understand how all those are every man and woman's problem, but all those are especially dangerous in leadership. What's the lust of the flesh? The lust of the flesh is ultimately a temptation to feel. I want to feel good. It is passion. How many times have I heard somebody say in my ministry, well, you don't know how he or she makes me feel. So I did this and, I know it's wrong, but you don't understand my feelings. Well, feelings can be a really terrible gauge of right or wrong. We all know that.
Yeah.
So we have this lust of the flesh, this desire to feel good that can get us in lots of trouble. Lust of the eyes. If the lust of the flesh is a desire to feel, lust of the eyes is a desire to have. I see that and I want that. So we can all feel that. I think we can all appreciate how that can get you tripped up at times. Then the pride of life. Even though the CSB says pride in one's possessions, the idea is that It's different than just greed. It's the idea that I gain my status from my power or what's around me or what I have. And so this pride is important because whereas I talked about the temptation to feel something, the temptation to have something, this pride is really the temptation to be something. I'm going to change my identity so I see myself as greater than or something. And you understand, it's not that hard. I mean, it's to connect these dots for all of us.
Yeah.
Probably in our minds to go, okay, I remember so-and-so, or I remember doing this. And so as you gain in power, and by power, I just mean the ability to exert change, that's leadership power. You're going to also increase the danger of those three temptations. The temptation to feel, the temptation to have, the temptation to be. You can put it this way. The traps are passion. Passion, if it's not kept in check, can get you in trouble. Possessions, man, can those get some leaders in trouble? And position. And so we got to address those, right?
So with those and understanding the traps, how do we guard? How do we set up, parameters around us and guard from those three things?
Great question, because that really is at the heart of it, right? If you just know and you don't do anything, well, it doesn't do any good. That's not what this is. We are strategic leaders. That's why we're hanging out on a podcast. And so, first of all, let's understand how those dangers work. In every three of those areas, generally, they manifest themselves in three things working together. And so here's, I keep throwing out these letters, but okay, three more threes, all right? We'll call it AAA. I mean, we can understand, if you're driving in a car and you have a problem, some people will call AAA because it'll get you there.
Yeah.
These three A's are the vehicle to failure or compromise every time. The first A is anonymity. No one will ever know. And it seems as though the higher up we go in influence or power, the more anonymity we can have, and especially in this day and age, they can get you in trouble. If I make a compromise on these receipts I turn in or this, financial decision, who will ever know? That's a real dangerous thing. When anonymity is then met with availability, in other words, here is an opportunity to compromise. With the money illustration, I have access here. It's right here. No one will ever know. And then you mix that with a third A, and we have combustion. That's appetite.
Appetite, yeah.
So I have this desire, the lust of the eyes in that case, and I have availability, and I think I have anonymity. No one will ever know. Well, the reality is all those are lies, right? Somebody is going to know eventually. It always comes out. And there's probably a deeper appetite for something else if you're longing for something that's wrong, okay? How many affairs have happened because of this? Well, no one will ever know, and she's right there, and I want to feel, something. Or it could be the pride of life, this idea that, hey, this makes me feel powerful, Whatever it is, it can be different sins or temptations that lead to these same three combos that get you in trouble.
And I think, and I've heard you say this, like a lot of times we may see this leader trip up or fall. We may see this happen. And sometimes we are naive to go, I will never do that. That's
crazy talk.
He's an idiot. He's such an, but the reality is like we're all susceptible to these attacks from the enemy. And we're all have these three things that we if we don't safeguard, we could fall just as.
This is a 30-year-old book, but Steve Farrar wrote a book called Point Man. And in that book, I'll never forget, he talked about the fact that he's met with so many pastors, and he said, in my experience, I've found that when somebody sits across from me and says, I don't have that problem, I would never fall, he said, I know who the next one could be.
Wow.
Because that's the most dangerous thing. So we have to be aware that we're all susceptible, and that allows us to get to some real solutions, right?
Yeah.
So I gave you three A's. First we had the three traps, the three A's. And here's the solution, and I'll just give you A, B, C, okay?
A, B, C, okay.
It's amazing when these three come together how you can really create an airtight defense mechanism for what inevitably will come to every leader, okay? The A stands for access now. I need to have other people who have access to every part of my life. And incidentally, I didn't use accountability because accountability sometimes has the idea that I get together with you and say, hey, have you done anything wrong this week? And I say no, and you say the same, or I ask you that, and you say no. And we say, oh, well, we're accountable. Well, no, in a bank, that's not how accountability works. Like, if I'm a teller at a bank, I'm not going to just have somebody go, hey, were you honest today? They're going to count the numbers. They're going to look into my records. They're going to recount the money, and there's cameras everywhere, right? Yeah. So that's accountability. When I say access, that leads to accountability. Someone has access into my heart and can ask the hard questions and who's not impressed by me. I mean, really, that's really important to have in your life. There shouldn't be anything on a leader's computer or phones that someone else doesn't have access to, in my opinion. All right? That eliminates the anonymity. Second, the B is for boundaries. We have to determine well in advance where we're going to be willing to draw the line. And very often we need to make sure that we know it's not because we're about to fall. It's because we want to make sure that we don't get anywhere near the edge of the cliff. So from a financial standpoint, these hands have never written a check at Kingsland Baptist Church because I've heard too many horror stories with the power or the influence that I have, and it makes it difficult for other people. So I'm just not going to make those decisions. I don't have anything to do with the finances at the church. So that's one way to have a boundary, to make sure, okay, that's not going to be a problem here because I have this and I have access into everything that I do in that regard, and so on. The C might be the most important, though. And it goes back to the appetite we talked about, and it's contentment. See, if I can find my contentment in healthy, holy places, then it's remarkable how the whole danger doesn't go away, but it's minimized greatly.
Yeah.
You know, if you're married, cultivate that relationship with your spouse. Make sure that it's healthy. Keep the date nights going.
Yeah.
And it helps so much. You know, whatever it is in your life, when you eliminate those things that become, tenuous, then all of a sudden you can find contentment, then all the other stuff begins to be less daunting. And when we go back to those traps, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life, temptation to feel, to have, to be, we can see it coming now. Yeah. Like, okay, I know how this works. I know the horror stories. And so I don't want to get wrapped up in that.
Yeah, and I think part of all of this too is being self-aware of knowing, the traps of my personality, that pride. When he said pride, I was like, immediately my chest, I'm not prideful, but I know that performance is a way for me to medicate maybe some wounds and some different stuff that I've dealt with. And so that's something that, if I find contentment of knowing that no matter what, it doesn't matter what I do or, how many people know my name, I'm content in who I am because of who God is, and finding that I have to remind myself that and be self-aware. Or people, Bobby, you did so great on this thing, or you put this thing together, and I start to, the appetite for more of that comes out, and I've got to go to the Lord and squash that and put that and find contentment in Him and say, God, if everything goes away, I'm content in who you are and how you've made me. And that's just one of the ways that I've had to really wrestle and know who I am and be self-aware. And I think that's part of leadership too, and knowing that. Yeah.
Awareness is so important. Self-awareness, awareness of surroundings, awareness of dangers. So I feel as though it's important to say before we close that we're not saying that you have to play scared all the time or have to assume the worst. You can still live life. I feel like I have freedom in my life, but I have put certain boundaries in place that limit those freedoms so that I can, in a sense, have more freedom to not have to worry about stuff like that.
Yeah. Even with our kids.
Yeah.
Boundaries equals freedom. It lets them know exactly where they get to play, where they get to go. And I think it's an amazing thing. And it's a key part of these traps and not falling in these traps as leaders. So if you're listening, you want more information, all the show notes are going to be on all of this. We've actually put together a Components of Compromise booklet that's already on Empowered Homes. If you want to look at that, we'll add all those links to the show notes and have all that
Good
available. But Pastor Ryan, man, it's such a vital conversation for us to have, and for leaders to know that we can look aside and be like, man, it's them. We have to be proactive in our own lives.
Isn't that true?
Our
and
own hearts.
incidentally, I know that it's not just pastors listening. There are people who are corporate leaders right now who are a part of this podcast. And listen, we need strong Christian leaders in the workplace. And so a lot's more at stake than just your job.
Yeah.
You know, you're representing Christ and, of course, your family and everything else. So that's another reason for the plea. And, of course, those in ministry who might be listening or with us today, how much more? And I can't say this enough. There are moments in my life where I've had people around me fall, or maybe I watch on TV and hear about some minister somewhere doing something crazy. And my first instinct is generally to say, how dumb can you be? You know, and I'll turn to Lana and say, can you believe that? But then most of the time, in the clear moments, the Holy Spirit will just kind of grab my heart and say, in a tender moment, Ryan, this could be you. You know, you stay aware and alert. Don't get prideful, or you end up right back there. Then the enemy has me. That pride of life, well, I'm this, so I could never be vulnerable. No. We stay aware, and then we have freedom.
Absolutely.
Man, enjoyed the
good.
conversation. Thank
Absolutely.
you, buddy.
If you want more information about what we talked about or any other leadership development stuff, empoweredhomes.org/leaders has a ton of great resources. So go and check it out. Thanks.
I love
Ryan.
it. Thanks for being with us.
Yep.